Hello and welcome to another episode of the Happy Head podcast. My name is Paul and I'm your host. Today I'm joined by Victoria. Good morning, Victoria. How are you doing?
Good morning, Paul. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm about to cough. That's why I just said that whole introduction in one breath, because you know when you get that tickly thing in your throat and you're trying desperately not to cough, well, it's going to happen. But I'm going to be a man about it, and I'm not going to let it defeat me. So we were just before we went live. Two of your kids have got chicken pox. That's not a good thing, is it?
No, they've both had it before, and as I've got three girls, the youngest one has never had it and doesn't have a single spot on her. But the older two, they've both had it previously, suffering a bit.
Yeah, I'm just saying to Victoria, that brought back memories of my childhood, and I definitely had either chicken pox or German measles or both. And I can remember being stood up in the bath, stark naked, and having my entire body covered in this stuff called chamomile lotion. I don't even know if you can get it, but what it did was it didn't sort of do anything to the actual virus, but it dulled down the desire to scratch your skin off, basically.
Yeah, it's meant to be quite soothing, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Because I can remember it was just like you just wanted to just grab your hand and just yank every bit of your skin off. It was just so itchy, and there was no oral medication at the time that you could take that would kind of dull that down. So it had to be this stuff they daubed all over your body. And I look like the abominable snowman, but a miniature version, just kind of white and all this hair. Just unbelievable. So, but we're not here to talk about chicken pox and viruses. We've had enough of that for the past couple of years.
Certainly have.
What we're going to talk about today, what should we talk about?
How about supported living and why it's such a fantastic thing?
Go on then, talk about that. Let's pick that.
Shall we pick that? So supported living is a property investment strategy where you as an investor provide houses and accommodation to organisations for people that are in need of just a little bit of extra help in their living circumstances. They're not capable of taking on a normal tenancy. So it can range from kind of learning or physical disabilities where they need help for potentially their whole life, or it can be just a couple of months through to a couple of years if they've fled domestic violence, if they've been homeless, that kind of thing, and they just need a little bit of help to get back on their feet before they can go on and take on a normal kind of rental tenancy.
So basically, supported living can be anything from having somebody looking after you 24/7 almost, to a kind of largely discounted or almost free accommodation to get you through a rough patch and out the other side. Would that be fair?
Yeah, so it's obviously it's always paid for by somebody, whether it be the council, a charity, a housing organisation, a registered provider, that kind of thing. So as an investor, you have your agreement with that kind of organisation, and then they have tenants come to them as and when they need their services. Like I say, some of ours provides homeless accommodation for homeless people, so they're coming off the streets and they're given a room and a safe, warm place that they can stay just while they get themselves back on their feet, and they get themselves kind of sorted. It gives them an address, it gives them a nice warm bed, it gives them a kitchen, a bathroom, things they haven't necessarily had access to before they can kind of take that next step in their life.
So you mentioned the word investor, which means obviously somebody putting in money to expect a return.
Yeah.
Is this because there are just not enough funds available from the government with a large G or a small g to help the people that need this kind of help?
Yeah, exactly that. And some of the housing associations I work with, one is a county council, others are charities and organisations that have been set up to assist these people. They don't hold the capital to buy property and to have these people come and live in it. So what they look to do is they look to work with people that do buy property investors for a living, such as myself, and then they lease the property from us, and then they put the tenants in it.
Right, so you've got a charity that doesn't necessarily have a big pool of money, like say Oxfam as an example, but there's a smaller charity that wants to help people in their local area, but they don't have the money, so they come to a company or a person like yourself and say, look, we need X, Y, Z. Can you get it for us? And we'll rent it off you for X amount of time. Is that kind of in a nutshell?
Yeah, that's it. So one of the housing associations I work with in Sheffield, they work with care leavers, so children that have got 16 are no longer part of the foster system, and they look for flats to pot these people. Well, they have HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy, for 16 to 18-year-olds. So they've got somewhere to live, and then from 18 plus, they provide them with a flat that they've got their own address, they've got their own independence, but obviously on their own they would struggle to find that accommodation. So they just give them that helping hand.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting because kids in foster care are probably, once they hit 16, they're no longer in that, whatever the term is, pool of kids that need support, well, not need support, they get given support. They're kind of like in a loophole of missing kids, aren't they, in a sense that because they've gone through the foster system, either they've lost parents for whatever reason, or their parents aren't able to care for them for other reasons. So they're already at a disadvantage because they're in the foster care system. And then it must be really, really horrible feeling to get to the age of 16, your 16th birthday, and to be told, there you are, thank you very much, bye-bye, off you go, look after yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, for me, it's massively morally rewarding to be able to provide somewhere for people that are in need, such as these children that have already had a bit of a difficult start to their life, and then they've got to a stage where they're told that actually they don't fit into that system anymore. So they've kind of got nowhere to go. So this, like I said, this charity in Sheffield then provides them with a stepping stone on to their own independence.
One thing I don't understand about why that happens at 16 is that we are still defined as children up until the age of 18. We don't officially become adults until we hit 18. So how come we kind of, or the government decides to ditch kids at 16?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. I'm not that deeply involved in that side of the politics. There are lots of random things. I found out recently that if you open a bank account for a child after they're 11, you have no access to that. That bank account is solely that 11-year-old's property. And to expect an 11 or 12-year-old to manage their own money seems crazy. But so there's lots of stuff that I don't understand about systems and the way things work. But I just know that I can fit in and I can help people. So.
That is just so bizarre. You know, you just said, so if you're 8, you can open a bank account and you can kind of, for your child, and take care of the money in that bank account. But if you do it when they're 12, you open a bank account for a kid, the child has full responsibility for that account. Again, that is just, I find there are so many bizarre anomalies when we talk about that, about when a person legally becomes an adult and when they're still a child. And yet we've talked about 18 when you become an adult, 16 you get kicked out of foster care, and now you're telling me that at 11, if you open an account for a child after the age of 11, they become solely responsible for it.
Yeah.
It's just weird, isn't it, when you think about all the, and I'm sure there are lots of other things that happen. Like when you go to a doctor, particularly girls when they're going for, the pill and such like, the parents aren't legally allowed to attend now over a certain age, are they?
I know they don't have to be told. I know it's private and confidential.
Yeah.
So children can go and obtain contraception without their parents being made aware.
Again, it's just one of those anomalies. There are so many anomalies, so much kind of incoherence. There's no wonder that when we talk about supported living, that again, there are all these people that kind of fall through the gaps that have to be supported by independent organisations, like you say, housing associations and charities, I'm guessing, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you get involved in all this?
Well, we went to a property seminar quite a few years back. My husband's always had a keen interest in property. And so we went, and there was a phrase which I have now kind of taken to live by, and it was that fear is temporary, but regret lasts forever. And I think that's such a great phrase to live by. And I think that everyone should do something that scares them completely. So we educated ourselves in property, and we were introduced to a contact that has a supported living contract with a council housing homeless people. And from a young age, I've cared for my disabled parents. I was a veterinary nurse when I worked. So caring and helping people has always obviously been a big part of me and who I am. So when I realised that there was a way to invest in property and to help people as well, for me it was just a complete no-brainer, and I knew that was the direction that I wanted my business to go into. And I'm now on a bit of a mission to try and encourage, inspire and educate people about supported living, because there is just so much demand for it. So like I said, it started kind of a few years back at a property seminar, but it's become a real passion, and I'm out there trying to encourage everybody to get involved.
I find this fascinating that you're kind of in that specialised area of the market, because I live in rented accommodation, and when I was looking, the one phrase, you talked about a quote, the one phrase that always springs to my mind is no DHS. Now, I'm not DHS, I mean, I work for a living, what have you, but so it's interesting that you have private landlords stick this all over their adverts, we don't anybody that's DHS or whatever, and yet we've got this entire niche, for want of a better phrase, of investors that solely deal with people that have challenges. It's interesting.
The no DHS thing is now no longer legal. You cannot put no DHS in one of your adverts. You have to be open to everybody. Which applicant you choose at the end, obviously, there's not necessarily that much kind of control over. I think generally people have quite a poor opinion of benefit tenants. Personally, I've had them. I think they're fabulous. I had no problems with them at all. So I think it's almost a bit kind of snobbery a lot on landlords' parts, and I think they think if they get a benefit tenant in, then they're going to cause problems, they're going to possibly cause some damage, they're not going to be the nicest of people. But I think that's just, like I said, just a little bit of snobbery. I grew up in a council house in South East London. My parents were benefit tenants. We grew up okay. My mum loved her little house. She looked after it. The neighbours were lovely. So I think that's just a misconception that a lot of people have. And I think if you come to understand, I had a conversation with a fellow investor just a few months ago, and they were a bit, I'm not sure if it's for me. And when I explained the kind of financial benefits of investing in supported living, the fact that there's no tenant fine fees, there's no management fees, there's no voids, so you get more consistent income without as many deductions, it suddenly becomes a little bit more attractive from a financial point of view as well to investors. But I think, like I say, generally, I think there is just an element of, and it is, I think just snobbery is the best word to describe it, that they think they're a lower class of people and they just want working people that they think will come into their houses, not cause any problems, not cause any damage and pay their bills, when that's not always the case.
So is it still very much a niche market, the kind of the supported living area of the property business, the property industry?
Yeah, I think there's definitely demand outweighs supply, definitely. And I think in recent years there's been a lot more kind of funding towards it. There's been more organisations kind of coming to the fore, but it's still, a lot of people still choose to kind of go mainstream, standard AST, private buy-to-lets, because they think it's easier. But like I say, if you have a full management service for a private tenant, or if you have a full management service for your supported living tenant, then there's not really a great deal of difference. And I think it's just trying to educate investors that it doesn't necessarily mean that your property is going to be given back to you in a poor state, that your tenants are going to cause trouble, or that there's going to be non-payments. And I think education is the key, to be honest.
So this is a kind of investment now. I'm trying to think of the right phrase here, because it's not obviously environmentally friendly, but in that sense of term, but you're actually putting back into, you're actually giving back in a sense, aren't you?
Yeah,
you're helping people out.
Investment.
That's the word. Thank you.
That's all right. I've discussed it obviously quite a few times now, but yeah, it is definitely an ethical type of investing, because you are giving back. You're supplying people with a basic human right that is somewhere safe and warm to call their home when they are probably at one of the lowest points in their life or at their time of need. So it's a great thing.
Yeah, and that is so true, because I've had several people on the show who have been in situations where they've literally walked out of the house with the clothes on their back, a kid in each hand, and that's it, no money, no nothing, and they've gone or they've been lucky enough to find a shelter or someone that's been able to help them out. And I know for a fact, because I've seen it happen, that there are people that aren't that lucky that get kicked out of accommodation and they end up living on the streets. I've met people in the town that I live in, Folkestone. I've spoken to homeless people, and even guys, I spoke to one guy who had the same name as me, Paul, several years ago, and he'd been kicked out by a very, very aggressive partner. And he was very, what's the word I'm looking for? He was a vulnerable chap, not in a kind of like mental sense, but just that he wasn't able to take care of himself. He was completely flummoxed by how he'd ended up on the street, and just wasn't able to kind of pick himself up and get on with things. He was a painter and decorator and a very, very skilled guy, yeah. But it happens, and he just couldn't get. I don't know whether there was no accommodation available or there were no kind of charities that could help him out. But yeah, he was on the streets for a long, long while.
And it's so sad. And I think if you're a young, physically healthy male, possibly female, don't want to be too controversial, but you are at the lowest end of the list, and obviously the council has priority for young families and children, or more vulnerable people with mental health issues, people with learning disabilities. So unfortunately, if you're healthy and fairly young, or kind of our age, I like to become young still, then you're not of a priority to the council. So then you would have to look for a charity or an organisation that could potentially help you.
Sorry. What I was going to say was the other issue, that if you don't have what's called like a fixed address, you often can't get a job.
No.
Because,
and that's where it then becomes a vicious cycle, obviously, because if you haven't got an address, you can't get a job, and if you can't get a job to pay some rent, how are you going to get an address? So that's where charities and supported living are a good kind of stepping stone for people like this, that can just provide you with somewhere, even if it's temporarily, kind of 2 to 6 months, just to start getting yourself back together again.
Is there any, what's the word I'm looking for again? Is there any kind of person that wouldn't be accepted into any kind of supported living accommodation? Do the housing associations, the charities have kind of like, absolutely not, we can't take this person?
I think that I can't answer for definite, but there are so many housing charities and associations out there that I think there's probably a housing association that would help a majority of people. I think it's just, knowing where to look and knowing how to contact them.
Yeah, because there's a thing in the local paper about a chap who was in sheltered / supported accommodation, and he'd been involved in some kind of drug related issues, and he'd been in this property for several years. The police been called round, not every night, but very, very frequently. And in the end, he was kicked out because he was upsetting and scaring all the other neighbours. And he'd been relocated to another part of the county and given a new accommodation. And I'm thinking, well, that's great for the people that he was upsetting in this location, but now the problem's been kind of transferred somewhere else.
And that's where I think it depends on the kind of association. And if it's just the council that are moving him, they don't always look at that kind of whole picture. I would love to be able to help people in every circumstance, but I think councils especially find that they need a house, so they find a box to put these people in. They don't necessarily look at the issues that person has in their life and think, well, if we move them from that box to that box, the problems are still going to continue, just somewhere else. I think you need to take a step back and look at, why is that person behaving like that? What help do they need, and what can we do to stop that cycle in their life and to provide them, to get them back on an even keel, to stop them exhibiting those kind of behaviours.
Yeah, because... Go on, sorry.
And unfortunately, that help isn't always immediately available, or the type of association that person is involved with isn't necessarily great at then talking to this association over here that could potentially get them the help that they need. And I think sometimes you need a bit more of a kind of a bigger picture to encompass that person's needs and figure out why they're exhibiting or why they're doing what they're doing, and get them the help.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You need, because it's not just the accommodation, it's the whole picture, particularly for people like that person I just mentioned, because there very well may be a reason why they're carrying out that kind of behaviour. And if you're just moving them from box A to box B, then the behaviour goes with the person.
Yeah, completely.
And so what you need to do is almost like have a complete kind of intervention team, for want of a better phrase, actually look at this person and go, okay, why is this happening? What are the motivators? What's going on? What can we do to get them out of that so that when we do put them in box B, they will be able to continue as a, I don't know, valued member of society, for want of a better phrase, rather than a troublemaker.
Yeah, completely. And there are a lot of housing associations that can talk to each other and that do kind of do inter-team referrals, but it's, I guess, those kind of funds and those kind of services aren't always available to everybody, unfortunately.
Yeah, because again, as we were talking earlier, the housing association's priority is getting people accommodated, and so that's what they're geared up for. That's what they're set up for. Looking at the wider picture is kind of not their remit as such.
No, exactly. They're there to provide somewhere for them to sleep and to wash and to eat, and not necessarily kind of have got the services in place to help with anything else.
Yeah, basically to keep people off the street, essentially.
Yeah.
So, what makes a good investor in this area? Is this a supported living, supported accommodation?
I think it's mainly, for me, it's education. It's knowing how to invest properly. I mean, the property market is on fire at the moment. Anyone will have seen that the house prices are through the roof. The growth that we've got is amazing. I think it's last month they were quoting something like a 10% rise in a year, and everyone was predicting crash post pandemic. So it's knowing how to invest properly and not just thinking you can watch Homes Under the Hammer and become an expert overnight. Get yourself educated, understand how to invest in property so that it's not going to end up costing you, and then educate yourself in what the area is like that you're investing. You need to know your area inside out. Local knowledge is definitely key. And then it's getting to grips with understanding what the housing associations and providers that you want to work with need. It's no good buying a 5-bed HMO if they're after a 1-bed flat. So what I like to do is do some area knowledge, get to understand the local area, what the streets are like, what postcodes or what streets to avoid, where you don't go out after dark. That's just as important as knowing where the nice areas are. And then I'd like to make contact with housing associations and get to know them, build a relationship with them and say to them, look, I want to buy what it is that you need. So tell me what type of accommodation that you're after and what you need, and I will then go and purchase that for you. So you, rather than buying and hoping to fill it, you're buying almost to order. So you know exactly what you want and the exact location that they want it, and you know that they can fill it once you've got that for them.
So the kind of investor you're talking about is someone that's got a fairly substantial amount of money to invest, not somebody that's got a couple of grand spare, as it were.
No, so we work with a group of select investors, but you need to be deemed as a sophisticated investor. I couldn't come to you and take your £5,000 life savings off of you and just use it kind of willy-nilly. That's not ethical, and it's not allowed. So I do work with investors, but you don't need as much money as you'd necessarily think. There are options such as rent to rent, whereas I could rent your house from you and use it for supported living as long as we've got the mortgage company's agreement. There is, so you'd need it to buy. Normally you'd need a deposit and potentially some refurb costs to buy it with, and then you would leverage the rest of it. So there's lots of different kind of options. There's what's called a purchase lease option, where you agree to buy it in a few years' time, but you kind of borrow it in the meantime. So there's lots and lots of different options. You don't need hundreds of thousands of pounds to get started, but you need a little bit.
So what's a little bit then? So if anybody's listening to this or watching this and they're thinking of, yeah, ethical investing, I like the sound of that, I'm interested. What is the kind of ballpark figure that you're thinking about that person had to have spare to invest in?
A lot of it kind of that's quite a tricky question to answer.
I know it is. I want to answer.
It depends on what you're buying, where you're buying, and they're probably the two biggest challenges. Obviously, to buy a garage in central London would probably cost you the same as you could buy an HMO for up in the northeast of England. So it depends on where you're buying and what you're planning on buying. If you wanted to come on board as an investor with a company such as mine, then you'd need to, it's a difficult one to kind of answer in numbers. We'd need to make sure that you're deemed kind of a sophisticated investor. We'd need to know kind of what you're earning, what you've got available, and different things like that before we could kind of make any commitments. So it's not one, unfortunately, that I can put into figures.
So a sophisticated investor is somebody who's got a fair bit of cash in their money in their pocket and is already invested in, they've got a portfolio and they understand about risk and all that kind of thing.
They need to understand the risk. They need to have a fair amount kind of spare, and they need to be earning a certain amount every year as well, so that if I was to take some money for an investment from them, I wouldn't be putting their lifestyle or their house in any kind of danger. That it has to be safe, it has to be ethical, it has to work for everybody. There's lots of guidelines that we probably haven't got the time to discuss, but yeah, there's a lot kind of involved in talking to
basically then I'm guessing you have to have money that you can afford to lose. So say for example I've got 50 grand, but that's my entire life savings and I've just been made retired. That's probably not the kind of person, even though 50 grand's a nice chunk of change, unless I'm actually in a job and still earning a salary, then you might consider them. But if that's the only amount of money I've got left, then that's probably not. Whereas if I've got 500 grand and I decide that I want to put 50 grand in some kind of investment, then that's the sort of person that you might want to talk to, essentially.
Yes, because that's a safer amount for you.
I can lose 50 grand if I've got 500, basically.
Yeah, so it's I can't. We're not allowed to put anyone's kind of home or lifestyle or anything in any kind of jeopardy. We mitigate as much risk as we possibly can, but with any type of investment, there is always stocks and shares. Any type of investment, there is always an element of risk. Even leaving it in the banks, as we saw a few years ago, can cause a risk. So you can never give 100% guarantee, and like I say, I would never put anybody in a difficult position. Legally, I'm not allowed to, and I wouldn't want to. So it's very kind of person dependent.
Yeah. So essentially, if you're kind of listening to this or watching this, and you're thinking that you want to invest some money, you have to be in a position where whatever X is that you want to invest, X is something that you can afford to lose. Whether you put that in the stock market, whether you put that on a racehorse or in property or a flash car, as a classic car to stick in a garage, it's got to be something. Because in the past, people have lost their entire savings through how can I put this politely, unscrupulous salespersons telling you that you put your money into this and you'll make triple that in 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I think anyone that sells you that kind of dream it's not real. We all know it doesn't happen overnight. No one can become a millionaire overnight.
Yeah, it's like those holiday, what were they called? We could buy 2 weeks in some villa.
Timeshare.
That was it, yeah, because that was the whole thing. They'd pay you a holiday for 4 days or something, and you'd get held into a seminar, locked in, until you kind of signed the dotted line to buy your 2 weeks in Marbella or wherever.
Yeah, and I think the government have obviously got a lot wiser, and guidelines have tightened up massively, which is why I can't sit here and say to you, yes, X, Y, and Z would work perfectly. So they have become a lot wiser. They do understand more about protecting people's money. So there are a lot more kind of guidelines that we have to stick to, and there's a lot more kind of involved than just saying to you, I'll take your £20,000 and put it in a house. That's absolutely fine. So it's, if you're interested in it, you need to do your homework on it, make sure you understand it, and make sure that those funds aren't going to affect you if the deal goes sour.
Yeah, just make sure you can afford to lose it, basically. I've got another difficult question for you, and this, This actually astounds me because I'm not an investor. I don't understand things, but I've got a kind of an inkling. Why is the property market on fire, to use your expression? Because we're in this period of, I'm guessing it's uncertainty. We've got the pandemic that is kind of tailing off. Hopefully, obviously there are a lot of people kind of saying it hasn't gone anywhere yet, but there's uncertainty over jobs, there's uncertainty over the economy, and there's lots of uncertainty. Yeah? And yet the property market, which is a very fickle kind of market, is just going ballistic. Why is that?
I'm just going to drop a disclaimer in from
I know, yeah, disclaimer.
I'm not FCA regulated, so I cannot give advice.
No.
And that everything you've just heard is just my opinion. But with regards to the property market, I think it's probably an amalgamation of the banks obviously aren't giving great interest at the moment. Anyone that's got a savings account, even an ISA, will be looking at it thinking, that's not what it was a few years ago. People have been furloughed, they've been at home, their expenses have reduced quite drastically, so some of them have built up a pot of cash that's sitting in an account not doing very much. And I think there's been, I don't know about you, whether it's just because I'm property related, but all over Facebook, all over the ads, there's been property seminars, become a property mastermind, making millions, have passive income. And it all sounds like an amazing dream. It sounds like you can just pop the money in and the coins come spilling out the bottom, which sadly isn't always the case. So I think it's an amalgamation of things. And I think the stamp duty holiday definitely helped. I think there's been a lot of people wanting to move their own home, people that have been cooped up in flats or areas with not much space, suddenly realise they need a home office, they'd like a garden to go and sit in when it's sunny, that kind of thing. So I think there's been a bit of a shift in people moving their own property and wanting somewhere out of the city. They don't mind a longer commute because they're potentially not going into the office as much, but they want a bit more space around them. But I think that a lot of people have realised that their money's sitting in the account, not doing very much, and like I say, they watch programs like Homes Under the Hammer and think, yeah, I could do that. So everyone's out there having a go, and it just, it's great for the estate agents, it's great for the vendors, but it's not so great for us.
That is such a good point you're saying there, because I live in Folkestone, which is less than an hour, probably about 55 minutes from the centre of London, King Cross and Pancras. And everywhere you look, there's scaffolding. I live in a street which is kind of like the multi-story Victorian houses. So like your rich merchants from London, this would be their summer home. The family would come down here for the entire summer while dad still works in London, and then would come down at weekends. Most of the properties have been converted into flats, 1 bed, 2 bed studios. But what I'm noticing now, and I find this really interesting, is that there's a couple of houses down my particular street that have been unconverted, if that makes sense, in that they were flats, but now they're having their guts ripped out and turned into single houses again. And I was talking to a builder about this a while back, and basically in London you can have a house, and this is what I didn't realize, but you can have a house that's worth close to $1 million or over $1 million, just a regular kind of 3-bed semi in some areas. So you come to somewhere like Folkestone, you can literally spend 300 grand on a house, have it ripped out, gutted, and say for the 100 grand of it made into a really, really nice place. Still have 500-600 grand, stick that in your bank, and you just got like an hour commute or less than an hour commute if you decide to commute at all. And with furlough, like you're saying, a lot of people thought, you know what, I can actually live with 20% less. I'll find myself a little job down this area or closer to London where I don't have to commute as far. Instead of it being a 2-hour commute each way, which is 4 hours a day, I can do an hour. Just cuts it in half. So I can see why that's happening in my town. Everywhere you look, there's scaffolding. There's houses being converted. There are other houses being unconverted. There are new builds everywhere. The massive kind of like the big 5-bedroom house that's spread out on a big plot of land are now disappearing, and there's a block of flats or 3 or 4 3-bed houses going on there. But it's got to stop at some stage, because it's like the old South Sea bubble. It can't keep expanding forever. I mean, or will it just keep going ballistic?
Well, obviously we don't make land anymore, so we need the land, and there is a massive housing shortage, so we need to build more houses. But I think with regards to prices, I think we will see a correction. Kind of depends on who you listen to. It's quite interesting. I love listening to different people's point of view. Some people think we'll do a correction fairly soon, with furlough having come to an end, stamp duty coming to an end. Some people think that this bubble is about to pop. Others think that we're at the start of a longer kind of climb up. And if you look at house prices, even when they correct, they never go back kind of much below what they were. So they'll go up, there'll be a slight correction, and then will grow again. Some areas don't grow as quickly. So up in the northeast, for example, it's taken them a long time to get over 2007's crash. They're only just kind of getting back above it now. So that takes a long time. But areas, big cities, Liverpool, the southeast, that grows very, very quickly. So you'll see, even if there is a correction, you'll see prices bounce back a lot quicker. So I think at some point in the next kind of year, we will see perhaps a slight correction, but I don't think we're going to see the crash that everyone's forecasting this time last year.
Why is there a housing shortage? Because the population in the UK isn't growing massively. Is it because of social change? Lots more divorces, lots of people separating. What's causing the shortage, in your opinion?
I'm not sure I've really given that much thought before. I think it potentially is that there are more separate houses, and I think potentially the type of housing that we're looking for is changing. The actual reason why, I don't know, I have to give that one some thought. But obviously we are growing as a population. I know certainly my friends, a lot of them didn't move out of home until they were 30 something because they couldn't afford the deposit. And I think we seem to be having more children. Certainly in this area, there's quite a few 3-4 child houses. So I guess it's just a growing population. Like you say, there's then families that are separating, so that's 2 households instead of 1. You don't stay together until death do you part anymore if you're not happy, do you?
Yeah, I think you got a point there. That's one area that I'd forgotten about. Is there are lots of people that would have probably moved out of the house in their early 20s. The parents are in their early 20s, but for whatever reason, they've kind of stayed there, and they're now in their late 20s, early 30s, and they've kind of gone, oh, it's time to move now, time to kind of buy a place. And then unfortunately, I know, well, even during the pandemic, there's been lots and lots of separations and divorces and all that. And when you separate, you've got to shift out the accommodation, which then increases a need for more flats or more sheltered accommodation, more supported accommodation. Yeah, so I guess there's probably lots and lots of small reasons why there is a demand. There isn't kind of just like we haven't just had like 100 million people move into the UK. The country would have probably tipped up to one side if that had happened. But yeah, it's just lots and lots of small reasons that have increased the demand. But then again, there's always been that demand to a certain extent. I can remember kind of like 10, 15 years ago saying that people saying that the government needed to allow more land to be used for housing. There's up the road from me, there's a former race course, Folkestone race course, and that entire area now is going to become like a village, because then it's been sold to a property company. They're going to build this huge little new village on the edge of Folkestone, and there's a lot of protest against it because okay, they're going to bung a school on there, they're going to bung some retail outlets and stuff like that, but there's no increase I'm aware of in the infrastructure. So no new roads, no new connections to the motorway and all that. So yeah, it's great. Okay, nice self-contained unit with schools and shops and that kind of thing. But we both know that people don't live on this new thing. They've got to go to work, they've got to commute, they're going to go visit friends and whatever. There's going to be a lot more cars on the road in that particular area. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is that, again, we talked about this before, not looking at the whole picture. Saying, yeah, okay, let's bung some houses on there. Off you go put a couple of schools in because we need to put some schools in because that looks good for the the public, because you're putting schools in, you're going to build some shops for Tesco's or whoever, but the wider needs of those people don't get looked at. Stupid things like power and water supply and sewage and all that. You don't see the infrastructure being kind of expanded.
No, and I agree with that. I think that is where, as I guess, I don't know, government, local councils, that kind of thing, are kind of a bit slow to react. That we need houses. After the Second World War, we had a glut of houses built because obviously there was a lot of bombing, there was a lot of devastation. The soldiers that were coming home needed somewhere to live, but that really tailed off after the Second World War, and the housing demand was never met. The houses weren't built to the demand that was there. So I think, going back to your previous question, that's potentially why there is such a demand now, is because there's been such a backlog and such a lack of houses, that it suddenly seems that everywhere is being developed. But I think when, like I say, and again, whether it be the developers, whether it be the councils, I'm not entirely sure who you'd want to kind of put the blame, for want of a better word, on. But I think we're quite reactive. We don't necessarily realise that we'll need a bigger motorway until everybody's sat bumper to bumper for 3 hours twice a day. We won't realise that the Victorian sewerage system can't cope with that massive influx until there's leaks and there's problems, and then we react and we fix it. So again, I don't, like you say, going back to that kind of bigger picture thing, I don't know who you'd say is responsible for that. I guess it could be portioned to both the developer and the council would need to ensure that the right policies are in place. But we need places to live, so it's a kind of a rock and a hard place, I guess. You can't. I think it's great that they're building schools around here. Our local secondary school is full to bursting. That the children that got their placements earlier in the year for this coming September will be sent over an hour away to schools because there was just no space in the local schools. The kind of 3-5 local secondary schools just were too full. So the children from our village here were being sent, like I say, over 50 miles away to a secondary school, that's not feasible for anybody. So the council then had to kind of react and come back and say, oh, actually, we'll create spaces in the local schools for your children, which, again, I don't think is potentially great because you're squeezing kind of 30 odd children into somewhere they're not meant to be. That's going to have an impact somehow. So the fact that you've got schools and shops being built in that development, I think there's obviously been some forethought, some planning, but with regards to the roads, it's where do you stop that? So do you build a whole new motorway to London? Do you build a whole new train track into London? And then what about those people that say, well, I'm not going to London, I'm going to Dover? At what point does that not become the developers or the council's kind of responsibility for putting that kind of village in?
Well, it's an interesting thing because we had a new development on the barracks, or part of one of the barracks here in Folkestone, and they had that very problem of sewage. The builders had done what they needed to do, but because of this influx of people into this particular area, the system couldn't cope. And rather than kind of proactively looking to go, okay, we've got X number of new people here, so do we need to enlarge the system in this area? Yes, we do. That didn't happen. It kind of like they waited for the problem to occur, which inconvenienced lots of people for quite a while, and then they went in and did what was necessary. So it's almost like, well, like, yeah, build the houses and we'll see what problems arise. We'll deal with the problems afterwards. I think it'd be much more cost effective to go, okay, well, look, we're thinking of putting 100 houses here. How is that going to impact? Yeah, okay, the builder has a responsibility to make sure that the houses are built properly and the infrastructure in that area that they're building on can cope. Then also the council that gave permission, because they're the ones that give permission for this to happen, yeah, they also have a responsibility to go, right, okay, you're right, we need to get the water board in, we need to get the gas people in and so on. Right, let's look at it, put in 100 houses here. Can your systems cope? Yes or no? And then somebody, and this is where it always comes down to money. It always comes down to money. Somebody's got to say, right, okay, somebody needs to dig their hand in their pocket and help us because our system works. But you're saying you want an extra, 10% capacity. We'd never planned for that. So again, it's one of these things where I think people need to get around a table and sit and debate it before they even bring the first tractors in to kind of clear the rubble away before they start building. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, it's just like, because again, talking about the schools on the estates, that's only a relatively new thing. I can remember going way back that developers on big sites had to kind of had their arms twisted to actually put schools and such like on a plot. I mean, one of the estates that I lived on was we didn't buy it new, but we were probably the second owner of this house, so the estate was 20 years old. They had a big space for a supermarket, had a big space for a row of shops, but no school, no new infrastructure. And from memory, there are 2 ways onto this estate and 2 ways off. And of course, at peak time, it's rammed. And the road that this estate joins onto has a connection to the motorway and a connection to town. So of course, you've got the 2 bits here that are rammed, and then the bits onto the motorway. And nobody had the foresight to think, well, actually, we're putting 2,000 houses here. In 5 years' time or 10 years' time or whatever, all these kids are going to be wanting to go to secondary school. We need to think about having a new secondary school. So it comes down to, but anyway, that's somebody else's problem. It's not mine, thankfully. I'd have to think about it. Who do you like to work with as investors? You're right. I mean, we all talk about ideal clients and stuff. Who's your ideal investor?
I guess someone that I can have a relationship with. I need to be able to connect with you. We need to know that we can have a working relationship together. I would like to say someone that's got an endless pot of money, because that would be fabulous. But sadly, there's no trees that we can go and pick it off. So for me, I suppose it's somebody that shares my passion for helping people, where it's not just about the bottom line and the return. Someone that wants to make a difference with the investment they're making, and somebody, like I say, that I pretty much get with most people, but someone that I can connect with and talk to and have a really good relationship with.
And I'm guessing also somebody that is prepared to be invested for the long term, at least at a minimum of 5 years or so, because, like you say, property doesn't return a decent investment until after a certain period of time, if at all. So you've got to be in it for the long game, not the short game.
Yeah, so the investors we work with are long term. We don't have people kind of dipping in and out, and kind of just for a few months or a year or so. That's not how we want.
Workable.
We want long term. We want long term kind of relationships.
So where's the best place for people to get hold of you? I mean, do you have a course or training that you provide for people that might be considering getting into investing in this particular niche?
I am just setting up a coaching scheme, so if people are interested in learning a bit more, they can contact me on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I think my website is in the show notes. I think I've sent all those links. Victoria, if you type in Victoria Eley, there aren't that many of us, so I should pop up.
Brilliant. Listen, Victoria, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching, folks. Before we go, Victoria, any last words, any final thoughts?
I think it is, feel the fear and do it anyway. If you think that there's something you want to do, but it's outside of your comfort zone, don't let that stop you. Go ahead and bite the bullet and just do it. And
be prepared to lose some money.
No, we take an educated investment.
Yeah, I'm being facetious. You got to educate yourself before you stick your hand in your pocket, regardless of whatever the investment is. Educate yourself first. You think about property, talk to somebody like Victoria before you even get your checkbook out, if people still have checkbooks. I certainly don't. But yes, education is key. Get to know who you're looking to work with, get to know what it is that you want to do, and make sure you understand it fully before you part with any money. Brilliant. Thank you, Victoria. Listen, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on the next episode. Bye now. Thanks very much, Paul. Goodbye.